So I'd like to speak about it. I'm actually stealing this phrase from my wife, Gina. A lot of her teaching is about, she says it's about moving from the ego to essence. And I like that phrase, so I'm going to borrow it, I guess I should say. I'll give it back to her after satsang. And there's really two parts to moving from the ego to essence. One is a kind of dissolving, loosening, opening up of the structures of the ego. And the other aspect, and it's really two aspects of the whole spiritual journey, is this loosening up again from the structures of the ego. And then the other aspect is just going direct, just experiencing essence. You can't move to essence unless you experience it. And so when you loosen up the ego, the two are related, because when you loosen up the ego, what's left is essence. And when you get in contact with essence, it tends to dissolve the structures of the ego. But what's the ego? What is that? It's kind of challenging, because with language, we always assume when something has a noun associated with it that it's somehow a thing, or it has some sort of lasting reality. But really, the ego, there should be egos. We should always refer to it in the plural, because the ego is really a collection. And it's not a collection of things, it's a collection of patterns, collection of thoughts, collection of beliefs, collection of strategies that we've developed, all of these kind of patterned ways that we function. So these disembodied patterns of thought, and again, they aren't things, they don't have a solid substance, there's just a patterning that happens to the movement of our awareness, the movement of our actions. And like I said, we all have these huge collections of them, because what those patterns are for is they're for our functioning. The ego is all of the ways we've collected to get along, to manage our lives, to relate to other people. And what we learn to do very early in our life is these kind of, in a sense, they're like habits. They're artificial patterns, artificial habits of relating, habits of reacting, habits of functioning. And we tend to collect a lot of them. Eventually being an ego, living inside an ego is kind of like, those stories you see on the news of people who are hoarders, and they've never thrown out a magazine since 1958, and their house just gets really, really full of all this stuff. Because if you need a formula, a habit, a pattern to react to something, well, life itself, in case you haven't noticed, is full of a lot of non-formulaic experiences, a lot of unpredictable experiences. Things are always changing. And so the ego's response, this habit-making capacity that we have, its response is just to collect more and more and more beliefs, more and more images, more and more kind of identities, more and more habits, until it can, again, feel like you're in a room without much space in it. You live in a small apartment that's, full up to the ceiling with stuff. And then there's these little paths, and it almost can get to the point where the little paths fill up and you can't find the door anymore. It feels like you can never get out of all of these reactions. And so I said the first part of, this kind of, or one, it's like, in a sense, it's like burning the candle at both ends. One way to deal with this experience is to start to dissolve, loosen, clear out some of those patterns, some of those beliefs. That can be anything from like psychotherapy to more what I call kind of psycho-spiritual approaches to clearing the stuff out. Things like the Sedona method, or Byron Katie's work, or something that I've been involved with that does a lot of that kind of work is the diamond approach. And I call them psycho-spiritual because they often have the stated intention of not just clearing out the ego, right? Some psychotherapy, that's its only intention, is to clear out the ego and maybe upgrade, some of the furniture in the room, get some new, better, more effective, more functional ways of being in the world. Whereas, these more psycho-spiritual things also include this other element, this other possibility, which is to get in touch with essence. Ultimately, of course, to get in touch with your true being. But tonight I'm focusing on, I'm using the word essence in particular and defining it as the essence is the capacity of our true nature to function. Essence is all the ways our true nature expresses. So it's all the more, actually more authentic, more capable ways that our being can respond in all of the situations that our ego has collected all those formulas for, all those automatic ways of responding. Our essence can just respond. Our essence responds to what's actually there. It doesn't refer, in a sense, to a formula. So essence, in the way I'm defining it, the way I'm speaking about it, it's the aspect, or many aspects of our true nature that is the aspect of our true nature that meets the world, that can function. And this is good news because one of the challenges in the approach of, especially approach that's purely about clearing out the ego, cleaning out all the accumulated junk from years and years of living in this small apartment with, all your stuff, is that it can be hard to let go of the ego when that's the way you know how to function. If you don't, if you decide you're really going to clean out your apartment and you start throwing out things that you actually use, I'm going to get rid of all this toilet paper. It's like, wait a minute. Is there something else? I mean, are you going to install a bidet or something? And so essence is, actually that's a great metaphor. Essence is like the actual authentic, real, functional aspects of our being. I really tend to wear out metaphors, but in a sense you could say essence is like the plumbing in your apartment, the stove, the refrigerator, the things that you really do, in a sense, use ongoingly, that actually are functional. It's kind of a weak metaphor, but because essence has a tremendous capacity. It can do a lot more than a refrigerator. And so this other aspect, this other possibility to get in touch with presence, with essence, with being, and specifically with the aspects of being that I'm calling essence, that are, the way being moves in the world. Because if you then you're not just like getting rid of the old way, you're actually replacing it with something that's actually better, more functional. It makes it a lot easier to make that leap. So how do you get in touch with essence? I don't know if you can sense even in that question, there's a little bit of this ego wanting a formula. And the thing about essence or being is that it kind of blows up your formulas. It doesn't correspond to them. It takes you outside of any kind of simple formula. And so possibly the best we can do is a kind of pointing to, it's like pointing in a much more open-ended way. Most of the formulas, most of the strategies of the ego are how to get your spouse to clean up, pick up their dirty laundry, how to get yourself to pick up the dirty laundry. It's like all these very specific kind of outcomes. But with essence, it's more like you throw the windows open, the doors open to the room. You let in some fresh air, and you just, whatever comes in with that fresh air is whatever comes in. And so I can speak about it, but it's more in that kind of sense, more in the sense of what's it like in general. Actually, after that, I'll bring it down and hopefully give a little bit more specific, possibly kind of experiential flavor of it just before we meditate. But there are like these principles rather than formulas. They're more like principles, how you would recognize essence, where you would even go to look for it. And one of the principles of essence that is important to keep in mind is that it has all these different flavors. And so you never know whether when you actually touch your true nature, whether the quality that it has is going to be something like peace. That's a very common one. Right? Or it could be something like joy. And peace and joy, see, they're both expressions of essence, but they're about as different as two expressions of essence can be. Peace is this very deep, quiet, dark kind of stillness. And then joy has much more this kind of bubbly sense of energy rising, energy expanding. It's not usually that associated with things being very quiet when someone's feeling very joyful. So to start to have a sense that every time possibly you contact essence or your being, it will have a different flavor or a different mixture of flavors. And these are things like peace, joy, compassion, clarity, strength, will, sense of power, sense of integrity. It's an interesting one. There's all these. It's like a Baskin and Robbins. All these different flavors, and you can discover new ones. And again, you start having like a couple thousand flavors, and then you start thinking about all the combinations you can have. You could spend the rest of your life going to that same ice cream parlor, and its essence, that kind of determines what flavor it has. So again, I'm pointing like this. I'm saying, hold the possibility that when you touch your true nature, when you touch into essence, that it could come in all kinds of different flavors, all kinds of different colors, different energies, different qualities. Another unique thing about essence is that it's a little bit of a misnomer to speak about moving from ego to essence, because the nature of essence is that it's always present. The nature of presence is that it's always here. All that happens when we have accumulated all of these mental structures that we call the ego is that it's harder to recognize, it's harder to notice. So again, using my little metaphor, essence or being is like the air in the room. And no matter how much stuff you pack into your room, as long as there's like this much space, there's still air. And then it goes even further than that, using the metaphor, because there's air inside the objects. And it permeates. So it's not even actually separate from. It's not actually like excluded by the structures of our ego. And so in experiencing essence, in experiencing being, it's more like a shift in what you notice. A shift in the particular, like in the metaphor, it's instead of noticing the solid objects in the room, it's noticing the gaseous presence in the room. It's as different as solid objects are and air is, it has this totally different gas, has a totally different quality. You have to, if you do this, you can feel it, but you have to, be, in a sense, tuned in to the presence of air. And in fact, it's a very common thing that we tend to not even notice the air. We take it for granted. Something that's that ever present, we just don't tend to really notice it. We might notice something in the air, like, bad smell or a good smell, but we don't often really directly experience the air just because it's so ever present. And so presence is like that. It's like, it's not, again, I don't know if you can feel that, again, it's this kind of pointing. It's not, it also is not a thing. And it's a no thing that's, in a sense, in a whole nother dimension or in a whole nother state than our usual kind of mental structures. The usual mental world that we live in. And yet, it's always present. It's present even within them. And this is good news, because there's often an assumption, a very big assumption, that in order to experience my essence, in order to have an experience of something truer and more real than this kind of limited ego reality that I've lived my life inside of, there's often this assumption that we need to have cleared it all out. Right? We need to have finished clearing, and we need to, get rid of the furniture, get rid of the carpet, get rid of, and maybe even tear down the walls and have nothing there. Then finally, if I could just simplify my life, get rid of all my problems, get rid of all my old conditioning, then I could experience peace. Wouldn't that be nice? If I could just go live in a cave or go somewhere where none of that stuff exists. Of course, then you have whatever stuff is in the cave to deal with, like the mice and the snakes and things like that. So this, like I said, is really good news, because anyone who's ever begun the process of clearing out the ego has discovered that there's a lot of stuff there, and it gets worse. Life itself keeps adding to our every day we have new conclusions that we come to. Every day we watch something, read something on the internet, we have some new belief, new idea. Somebody says something to us, something happens, something we own breaks, and then we suddenly assume that all of those are bad. Our car broke down, so all Toyotas are really a piece of junk. So all your whole life, there is stuff being added to that room. It obviously is still really important to clear some of it out. It obviously makes it easier to notice this subtler presence. It does make it easier, but the good news is it's not necessary. It's possible to actually just directly experience peace or joy or love, and in a sense experience the peace and the joy and the love that's already here, that's already permeating this moment and every moment, that's present in all of your experiences. So like I said, it's just good news that you don't have to complete the process of clearing out the other junk before you can start to notice the air in the room. And even when it seems like you're, like I said, living in this room with so much stuff, it's still possible, right? In one of the most kind of contracted, limited, egoic moments, to simply notice presence, notice essence, notice if there's any peace at all here. Which is actually brings up my third point about noticing essence, which is that it doesn't really matter, in a sense, how big an experience of essence you're having. It's the amazing thing about essence. The quality of it, the nature of it, is the same whether there's just a little bit or whether there's a lot. And both of those, by the way, can be challenging. To really notice the simple nature of essence, what peace, for instance, is really like. It can be challenging to notice that when there's not much, right? When it feels like it appears, it really is just a projection of your mind, but it appears as if you have all these problems and all these thoughts, and the mind is very busy. In a moment like that, to notice the peace when it's very small can be challenging, but it's possible. There's no reason not to also notice the peace. So it kind of simplifies this second aspect of moving from ego to essence, in that you can just go ahead and do it. It's always here, and it doesn't matter how big it is. And I started to say, it's also challenging. It just happens to be kind of challenging when peace shows up in a really big way. Because I mentioned earlier that essence, an experience of essence tends to dissolve our ego structures. And it can be pretty challenging when you have a big experience of essence and a lot of your ego structures start dissolving all at once, right? And so but in holding it this way, holding that it doesn't really matter, especially I think the holding that it doesn't matter if it's really small, because most of the people in this room would probably really like a big experience of essence. If I had some wonderful new drug that was guaranteed to work, I bet you I could find a few takers in this room. It's helpful to recognize that the big experiences can be kind of challenging, because it just happens. It's happening so fast. It's coming on so strong. So given those again, kind of more not like real formulas, but more deformulas. Deformulizing this question of what is essence, what is the truth about essence, what is the possibility right now of experiencing essence. That comes in all these different flavors. It's always here, you don't have to get rid of anything else. And that it doesn't matter what size it is. So given those kind of more general guidelines, I'm just gonna invite you. It's you can hold it very lightly, in the same sense of that kind of more general pointing, but just invite you to let's since I spoke about it already, let's just pick the quality of peace and just become a little bit curious about the quality of peace. Like I said, the quality of peace is this very deep stillness. It's often associated with the color black on the subtle level, on a more subtle perceptual level. And there's just a profound stillness. So it's like, this is, it's kind of going against what I said, that it comes in all these different flavors, to actually pick one. But it can be, it's more like playing, It's like, let's find out what happens if you actually just go directly to peace, right? Especially with that second thing that I mentioned, like right now, if you start noticing, being curious about peace, and what you get to do is just let everything else be here just the way it is, right? For a moment, you don't have to change anything else. You don't have to make your mind get any quieter. You don't have to get rid of any of those voices or thoughts, ideas that pop up. It doesn't matter what happens in the room, whether the furnace goes on or off, whether it's noisy, whether Nirmala keeps talking or doesn't keep talking. It's like the invitation is to simply notice the peace, the stillness that's here even while all that stuff's going on. Like even if there were 20 kids running around that apartment, to notice the peace that's also present. And finally, that last little bit, to just check right now if you can, if there's any peace at all. If there's any sense of it, if there's any, like on the, like, on the edges of your awareness, possibly underneath you, just check if there's any sense right now of a kind of deep, dark pool of peace. No matter how small your sense of it, your experience of it is in this moment. And just to very simply find out what you can discover about the peace that's always here. If there is even a slight sense of it, a wonderful question is where does it stop? Does peace actually stop where the furniture you're sitting on begins? Again, I said that essence is the way our being functions, and peace actually is very specifically the aspect of essence that dissolves our ego. That's its functional quality. So you can just notice what effect peace is having on you. Again, without having to change anything, get rid of anything, make it into a bigger experience than it already is, or make it into a smaller experience than it already is. And we'll just take some time now to notice, to explore, to enjoy the peace in whatever way you are experiencing it.